The Russian embassy in London has today honoured the Church of England's most senior cleric with an award for friendship. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan has, since he was a teenager, been fascinated by Russian literature and has now published a book on Dostoevsky. Some of his studies and poems have been translated into Russian, and there's been a special presentation for him at the embassy today, from where the Archbishop and the Ambassador, Yury Fedotov, I think to pronounce his name correctly, join me live. Hello, welcome to you both. Question to the Ambassador first. What has the Archbishop done for Russian culture? Why is this an important award?
Good afternoon. And Archbishop did a great deal of work to bring closer the culture of Russia and the culture of the United Kingdom, and he dedicated himself to study famous Russian writers, including Fyodor Dostoevsky, who is a symbol of Russia. And this year he will publish another book on Dostoevsky, and what he is doing helps tremendously to establish better understanding, to set a better climate in the relations between Russia and the UK. So for this outstanding contribution to the strengthening of relations between Russia and the UK, President Medvedev issued a decree awarding Archbishop of Canterbury the Order of Friendship.
Archbishop, how do you feel about being credited with warming relations between Russia and the UK today?
Well, I'm very delighted and rather overwhelmed, really. The fascination of Russia as a culture, as a place for literary and philosophical and religious thinking, that's been part of my life for a very long time, since I was a teenager.
How did you first become interested in it?
I think first by seeing some of the films of Sergei Eisenstein when I was a teenager. The films of Ivan the Terrible and Alexander Nevsky, and being absolutely riveted by a whole new world, historically, culturally, and then beginning to enjoy Russian music and then Russian literature.
Is there something of a parallel, do you think, between Russian sensibility and Anglo-Saxon sensibility? There doesn't seem to be on the surface of things.
That's a very interesting question. I think a lot of people would say they're absolute polar opposites, because people think of the Russian sensibility as extremely tragic and intense, and the Anglo-Saxon sensibility is rather different. Now, of course, I'm not an Anglo-Saxon, I'm a Welshman, so maybe I'm equipped to stand somewhere in the middle. But one thing people often overlook is the extraordinary parallel between a writer like Dostoevsky in Russian and a great 19th century English novelist like Dickens. Dostoevsky admired Dickens immensely, and some of the mixture of the grotesque, the comic, and the profound is in both writers.
This translation of some of your poems was a surprise element of the ceremony today, wasn't it? Are you able to read us a couple of lines from one of them?
I'm afraid I don't have it in front of me at the moment.
I was hoping for a performance. Do you understand the Russian? Presumably you've read all this in translation, have you?
No, I read Russian, and I've worked on that for some decades. It's a bit rusty now, but I have also translated some contemporary Russian poetry as well as other things.
Well, that certainly makes you unusual in British terms. Ambassador, Russia and the UK haven't been very good at being political friends recently. You talk about this helping relations. Is there, do you think, at least hope of friendship on the cultural front?
I would not say that there are real problems in the bilateral relations.
Well, lots of people would, but we're talking about culture at least.
Culture, of course, was always, as you spoke about the poles, and you know, in the physics, opposite poles are attracted naturally to each other. It happens also in the cultural exchange and even in political exchange. Also, UK continue to be one of the most important Russian partners in terms of trade and investment relations.
Archbishop, you've written and talked, I know, about the mystery of Russia. We've talked about some similarities, but part of your fascination with Russian culture was having these strangers at the other end of Europe that you were somehow drawn to. Can you explain?
Yes, as I say, the discovery of the Russian cultural world when I was a boy was certainly the discovery of something that at first seemed very exotic. We shared a Christian faith at the other ends of Europe, but it was a Christian faith that often expressed itself in rather different forms. And yet, the deeper you go in, of course, the more that particular Christian common ground comes to light. And for me, part of the fascination of studying Russian religious thought was to see unexpected echoes in all kinds of places, the mystical writings, the spiritual writings of both cultures, both Christian cultures.
If Russian culture is difficult for foreigners to access, where would you suggest is a good in point? Where could somebody who's inquisitive about Russian culture start on Russian literature and expect to appreciate it?
I think one of the most accessible ways in is looking at something like the short stories of Chekhov. Chekhov is known mostly to us as a dramatist, but he was also a writer of brilliant short stories, often quite comic short stories. You have there some of the poignancy, some of the emotional subtlety and the depth. And I think they're not intimidating. They're not long. Everybody thinks of Russian novels as far too long. They're not, but that's how people think of them. And the short stories are a very good way in.
Mr. Ambassador, are ordinary Russians, do they have a sensibility towards Russian literature? I mean, I know there's a huge national pride in great figures like Chekhov and Dostoevsky, but how much do ordinary Russians really know about them or care?
They do care, they continue to care, and some people say that Russians still continue to be one of the most reading nations in the world. People love reading everywhere they can. Of course, new technologies, computers, internet, but still, at least in Russia, nothing can replace a good book.
And this year is the anniversary of Chekhov.
Yes, indeed, this anniversary of Chekhov, and there will be another surprise. There will be medals which will be awarded by the Russian government soon to people who were distinguished in promoting the Chekhov's works in different countries in the world, including in the UK.
Archbishop, congratulations on your award. That's the Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, and the Russian ambassador to London, Yury Fedotov. You've been listening to Europe Today. That's about it on the programme today. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned. A summary of the world news is next.